Thank you everyone for joining us for our weekly Hanauma Talk series presented by the University of Hawaii Sea Grant Hanauma Bay Education Program for Thursday, August 6th. Today we are featuring Kanisa Seraphin from Voice of the Sea series, and she'll be talking about Hanauma Bay ZOOMinar, education and research during COVID-19. We'll start off with a 25-minute video episode, and then we will have a post-survey poll, and at the end we'll have a discussion with researchers. If you guys have any questions, please keep your guys' questions to the end of the talk, as well as if you guys do have any questions during the episode, please use the chat room to the right when you guys put it up. So without further ado, Kanisa.
Awesome. Mahalo, Gavin. We're really excited to do this series. That's our first one. So thank you all for joining us and sort of being here at the inaugural event, if you will. If you don't know how to turn your chat box on, there should be a small icon that looks like a web chat or a phone chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can click that. You can also click the participant button to be able to see the names of the folks that are with us, or you can raise your hand or do things like that in the participant window. We're going to turn off our audio and video while we share the episode with you, just to keep our bandwidth down. But like Gavin said, please use the chat box to interact with us and ask questions. And then you'll have a chance at the end for our panelists, which include all of our fabulous researchers and Hanauma Bay education staff, to interact with you on video and with their voices. In addition, I'm going to post a link in the chat right now, which is a web link. So just in case you're not getting good audio or video over the Zoom feed, you can go to our website and click the feed you'd like to choose there. So you can choose either English subtitles, no subtitles, or Samoan subtitles from the link that I just put in the chat. And then without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start our episode. In this episode of Voice of the Sea, we explore Hanauma Bay, one of the most unique marine protected areas in the world. We talk to experts from Hawaii Sea Grant, who run the Hanauma Bay Education Program, and to researchers from the University of Hawaii, who are working to understand the ecology of the bay and how it is impacted by visitors. We'll also talk about how the coronavirus pandemic is providing Hanauma Bay with an unanticipated period of rest, and the plan for continuing research, education, and volunteer programs. I was happy to start off talking with my friend and marine educator, Annie Rosa.
Aloha everyone, I'm very happy to be talking with you as well, Kanisa, and bringing the bay to everyone's living rooms. I am an educator at Hanauma Bay. So with the Hanauma Bay Education Program, one of the things that we teach about is the place itself. And it's interesting to be here, removed from the place, but still with the people that are connected to the place. Hanauma Bay is a conservation area. It's a bay that was formed about 30 to 40,000 years ago through volcanic action. So eruptions coming up from underneath the seafloor and forming Hanauma Bay. And geologists think that at some point the bay was a complete circle crater, and at some point it actually was able to erode and have the one seaside fall in and form that crescent shape of the bay. One of the meanings of Hanauma is the curved bay or the crescent-shaped bay, Hanauma. It is a place that is a conservation area. So we have an opportunity when we do go to Hanauma Bay is to see more marine life, more diverse marine life than we might see in other surrounding areas because it's protected and nobody's taking anything out. So I was born and raised in Mauna Bay, which if you look right up the mountain, you see Hanauma Bay as the backdrop, which is Coco Head. And my family is from that area. My dad grew up fishing there, and my grandfather was actually watching the fishery for the Bishop Estate. So he was the last konohiki. So the konohiki in the Hawaiian style, which is to watch the fishery resources in the Mauna Bay, and also extending into up the wall, as our paddlers would know, around to Hanauma Bay. If you come into Hanauma Bay as a local Hawaii resident, you make sure you bring your ID so you can get the fee waived. Otherwise, if you're a non-resident, you bring your $7.50 and pay admission. You get a ticket and you get to come into our education center, learn about the bay. You get to see a educational video that tells you the conservation rules as well as ocean safety information. And that is your way that you get down to the bay. So without seeing that information in the video, then you wouldn't be able to pass down into the bay. So both education as well as regulating the amounts of people is why that educational video is there. So only 500 people an hour would be passing through that educational video process. And that limits the amount of people going down at any one time, with the goal of having less than 2,000 on the beach at any one time.
And for you being in this long generational line of caretakers of Hanama Bay, how does that make you feel?
I feel really grateful to still be carrying on in the capacity of education at Hanauma Bay. You know, it's modified over the years. So, you know, my grandpa was a fisherman and caretaker, and my dad as well, waterman and caretaker of the surrounding waters. So I feel grateful to be an educator and pass a good message on to the next generation.
And as we're in this time right now of the coronavirus, where we're all social distancing, you and I are having this conversation online rather than in person, and the bay itself is shut down for visitors now for about a week and a half. Can you speak to maybe what you think might happen to the bay itself as people aren't going in the water on the shore there?
Yeah, so I guess in this time, it's a time to reflect on things, definitely. And one of the words that comes up is kapu. Kapu meaning not only restricted, but of significance, of the law, even sacred, and of importance. So it's a rest time that we've been taken into in order to, you know, protect ourselves and everybody. And hopefully it's a positive rest time for the bay. Hanauma is the place and the marine life, but Hanauma is also the people. So we definitely send our aloha and concern to, you know, all of the folks that work alongside us at Hanauma Bay. Our team ranges from community volunteers to education park staff, city park staff. We have vendors, you know, like snorkel, tram, gift shop, snack shop. We have security guards. So we definitely send our aloha to all those folks as they are a part of Hanauma Bay. Hopefully everybody is getting along okay throughout the closure.
Mahalo, Annie. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our visitors that we didn't touch upon?
Just wanted to thank you for spending the time with us, and we look forward to seeing you, connecting with you either online or in person at Hanauma Bay. So mahalo and ahui ho.
Ahui ho. Aloha, Gavin.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today remotely. And the first thing that I want to talk about is your role at Hanauma Bay.
I am the outreach program coordinator for the Hanauma Bay Education Program. My responsibility is providing a weekly lecture series that features researchers from various institutions in the marine field sharing their research. So each month we have different types of themes covering Hawaiian monk seals to coral reef conservation. And I also out with a lot of the school groups that come to the Bay trying to learn about marine conservation. Due to the COVID-19, unfortunately, we are not doing it in person anymore for the time being. At this point, I'm trying to utilize resources such as Zoom to pre-record our researchers' presentations, just to kind of still offer them the opportunity to learn about what they are researching, at the same time abiding by the social distancing and stay-at-home mandate. That way, we still continue to offer education to our community. The lecture series gets offered every Thursday night, free to the public, 6:30 to 8 when it is open, when the Bay is open.
How long have you worked at Hanauma Bay?
I've been at Hanauma Bay for approximately 15 years. I started out as an education assistant, worked there for a couple of years, and then I was offered the stewardship coordinator position. And just recently, last year, I actually was promoted to the outreach program coordinator. Ever since I was young, I actually love the marine environment. I love fishing, but then yet I want to conserve the environment. So it offered a great opportunity for me, especially because it's so near a lot of beaches, which I like to go to. I also do a lot of underwater photography and take a lot of pictures, which our education program utilizes for our various education resources. It gives me a both opportunity to do both at the same time. So it's a great place to work.
So if I come to Hanauma Bay and I'm in the education center and I'm checking out the kiosks, you actually took almost all the photos of the different kinds of fish I'm going to see.
Mm-hmm. Especially on the kiosks, I've taken most of the videos that are shown. So we usually update them maybe every 2 or 3 months so that it keeps it kind of up to date. It's a great place to come snorkel because there's a lot of marine life there, which you do not find elsewhere in a lot of the areas that are not conservation areas. A lot of the fish are fished out. And at Hanauma, I think you see the most fish versus other areas of the island just because it is a conservation area.
The University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program, focused on Hawaii's coasts and its communities through sustainable development, safe seafood supply, sustainable coastal tourism, hazard resilience, and healthy coastal ecosystems. Hawaii's Sea Grant.
Welcome back. We're talking with legendary coral reef researcher Ku'ulei Rogers to learn about her work at Hanauma Bay.
I started at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology at the Coral Reef Ecology Lab in 1992, which is 28 years ago. It's been a while, and during that time, I have conducted over 100 different projects. So we do work on local impacts, global impacts. In 1969, Paul Joe Keel started the Coral Reef Ecology Lab. And by the time I got there, we were some of the first to look at changes in ocean chemistry due to ocean acidification. We look at local impacts as well, such as sediments and nutrients and overfishing, human impacts, and just about anything else you can think. We have a very diverse lab. We not only conduct manipulative experiments, we also conduct field experiments and field monitoring. We were the first to set up a long-term monitoring program for the state of Hawaii since 1998, over 20 years now. And we have sites throughout the entire state, and we partner with the Division of Aquatic Resources so that this research and this monitoring will be ongoing so we can know what the changes in the reefs are. We work with a variety of communities, helping them set up monitoring programs, doing outreach so that they can understand what some of the issues are. We moved away from pure science, and we're still doing some of that, but we're also looking at solutions, things that we can do to actually make a change, a positive change for our coral reefs. But right now, because of this shutdown of Hanauma Bay and all the city parks because of the COVID-19 virus, we are finding this is the perfect opportunity for us to take a look at what is happening if you were to close the bay. How long will it take for improvement to be seen? And what types of improvement will we see in corals? We're looking in fish. We're looking at a variety of different types of projects while the bay is closed. One of them is fish behavior, because fish modify their behavior if there are too many people around, and we want to see how much they've been modifying their behavior. We're also looking at recruitment of corals to see if corals are recruiting on the flat areas of the reef. Because right now, in the heavily used areas, most of the corals are found on vertical surfaces, and they're in cracks and walls and places that people cannot access. And we want to see if these horizontal areas would be able to come back if they didn't have the constant visitor impacts.
You're a researcher at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology in Kaneohe, which is where you do your laboratory work and other aspects of your research. Can you tell me how that's been impacted by COVID-19?
Well, all of the university now many of us are working from home. We're fortunate at Moku'alo'e or at HIMB. We're able to take our work home. So we still can continue our Hanauma Bay project, but we also have a lot of other work we can do from home with computers. We've taken home microscopes and settlement tiles so that we can continue our work there. Some things we can't do that we'll have to wait, but many of the things we're actually catching up on and doing pretty well.
Is there anything that you would like to share about your work at Hanauma Bay or about the type of work that you do in general?
One thing I'd like to share is that the biggest threat to Hanauma Bay, as well as to the rest of the world of our coral reefs, is the impact of temperature rise. The bleaching events have already killed off over half of our reefs. But the good news is that we can do something about it. If we all work together, we're at a crossroads right now. And what we do today is going to determine what's going to happen in the future to our reefs. But we have that great opportunity to tell the future generation that we were part of the solution to actually save the reefs. And we all have to do that by getting on board to reduce our carbon. Think about every purchase you make. How long are you keeping it? What was it made for? What are you going to do when you dispose of it? And eat lower on the food chain. The lower you eat, the more fruits and vegetables, it's better for you, it's better for the coral reefs, it's better for everyone in the world. These things are very important, and they're simple things that all of us can do.
We are looking for a few heroes, mentors, trailblazers, innovators, a passion to change lives, spark curiosity, open hearts, and awaken minds, help students answer the question, who am I? This could be your calling, but this is no job. It's the journey of a lifetime. Be a hero. Be a teacher.
Welcome back. I'm talking with scientist Sarah Severino to learn more about the techniques researchers are using to study Hanauma Bay. Can you talk to me about some of the tools that you use to look at water clarity or count the number of fish or coral cover?
Yeah, so we actually have 8 permanent transects laid out on the inner reef flat there. So transects are just a fancy way of saying a plot of substrate. And we have 5-meter by 15-meter plots of substrate there that we monitor throughout the entire inner reef flat. And we go by and we count all the corals, we measure their diameter, we check on their health conditions. So that was really important this last fall when we had our bleaching event. So we were looking at their health, how are they doing? Another thing that we do is we go along these transects and we count the fish. And then we're also taking historical data for the fish and visitor counts and trying to see if there are any changes with the fish over time. So were there changes in the population abundance or biomass when they stopped fish feeding or when they started reducing their numbers? Because back in the late 80s, it was 3 million people. Now we have around 800,000. So we do see this reduction. Are we seeing changes in fish populations because of that? Another thing that we'll likely be doing in this month is something called a fish behavior study. And these typically are used when you're trying to look to see if a fish population has been pressured from fishing. We're going to be using it for looking for pressure from snorkelers or just visitor presence. What you do is you swim along a transect or a straight line and you film in front of you. And you're looking at these fish and you're filming them, you bring that back to the lab, and what you do is you count the distance between you and the fish before it turns away or before it speeds up in its swimming pattern. And then you also look at its behavior. As it's swimming away, is it going to hide? Is it just swimming in an opposite direction? Is it not bothered at all? So we're going to be doing those studies while it's closed during this month, and then also when it's open the next month. One of the ways that we measure water clarity is by using what's called a Secchi disc. This is a big round disc that you look at the water clarity vertically throughout the water column. And because Hanauma is so shallow, we actually use this horizontally across the reef flat. So one partner would hold the disc here while the other partner would swim away with a measuring tape, and they would record when they couldn't see that white disc anymore. They'd record that number, they'd swim away further, then they'd start swimming back to the disc and record when they could see it again. And you take the average of those numbers, and that gives you your average water clarity as far as the Secchi disc method goes. And we did this on open and closed days, and we found that the water clarity was 30% clearer on closed days.
Next, Morgan Mamizuka tells us how she started working at Hanauma Bay and how you can get involved.
When I first started at Hanauma Bay, I was actually a summer intern. I was just a student. They let me stay on after my internship was done, and I worked as an education assistant. I had really no formal training in volunteer management when I first started at Hanauma Bay. But working with the staff and all the volunteers, it kind of became something that I really cared about. All these different people coming together at Hanauma Bay because they care about that place and they want to have a hand in protecting it so that other people can come and enjoy and see really what's special and unique about the place. We really work hard to try and get our residents to come out to Hanauma Bay because we want them to feel like this is their place, to take ownership of Hanauma Bay and to be proud of a place like Hanauma Bay. Our natural resources need to be protected so that it can be like Hanauma Bay is, not just here in Hawaii, but elsewhere, to use it as kind of a model for people to take home with them. We always try to think of a loftier goal that when they come to Hanauma Bay, they're going to hear us tell them to protect this place so that it's here for other people to come back and enjoy. But we really want them to take that notion with them elsewhere, you know, to other beaches in Hawaii or other beaches back home where they're from, so that they can start to do the same thing where they're thinking, maybe I shouldn't be taking this coral out of the water. Maybe I shouldn't take too much fish when I go fishing. So that's really our message to not just our visitors, but our residents, to do what we have here in Hanauma Bay, to try and do that elsewhere.
You're getting your master's right now in online learning and communicating. Is there anything you've learned from your studies that apply now during this time of COVID-19 where we're having to practice social distancing? You're not able to go be with your volunteers at the Bay.
Yes, my master's program is a Learning Design and Technology program at University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I've been in a cohort where everything is online. So I haven't been in a class on campus at all for the last 4 years now. So that's something I definitely am thankful for, that I've been working the last 4 years. And I'm like, okay, this is my last semester and we're going to put it all to use now.
Do you have any messages or ideas that you'd like to share?
My message would be to, you know, if there's something you want to do, learn more about, like go out and find out if you can volunteer to help out. There's always a need for volunteers, not just at Hanauma Bay, but a lot of places around Hawaii, especially in a time like we're going through right now with COVID-19. Even little things to help out your community, places where you're from. Yeah, I'm an advocate for volunteering.
Hanauma Bay is a special place to visit and see marine life. You can learn more about the Bay online, and be sure to check out the Thursday night lecture series. Sign up to be a volunteer today. Watch more episodes and find additional content online at voiceofthesea.org. Follow us on social media at Voice of the Sea TV. Mahalo for watching Voice of the Sea.
Exploring our fluid Earth is the dynamic.
Aloha, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to send out our follow-up poll. So for those of you who took the first poll, these are the same questions, but they are now after you've watched the video. So we'd like to see how, if any of your answers have changed since viewing. And I also want to introduce you to our panelists. So you actually got some introduction to them in the video. We have Gavin Ibai, who introduced me in the beginning. We also have Morgan Mamizuka, Annie Rosa. I was hoping we'd have Liz Kumabe here, but I don't see her. She wasn't able to be in our video. She was on leave. She's been an educator at Hanama for a long time. And then we have Ku'ule Rogers and Sarah Severino from the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And I'm gonna open the floor now. I'll leave the poll open and close it in about 15 minutes, so you can kind of take that at your leisure. And we have about half an hour to talk story, and I invite you to ask questions. I'm really curious to know how their research has gone, especially since the Bay was closed for much longer than we initially thought. So we filmed this episode right in the 1st of April, and the Bay has been closed since March 16th.
Can you ask questions verbally, or you have to type it in?
Go for it, ask your question.
Okay, so when you're snorkeling and you're looking at fish, some of the fish really don't care. They're doing their thing and you're having fun watching them. Some of the fish kind of head away sort of slowly, but not in a panic. And then there's fish who have been hunted a lot and they have a really high spook factor, and they're out of there. And what I've always been curious about is when you're studying fish behavior, which is really fun to watch, is it the behavior of being hunted that causes them to do a lot of stuff as opposed to just being looked at? How do you differentiate between, I mean, I get it. That they're going to die if they don't get the hell out of there if a guy's got a spear. But are they smart enough to figure that out?
They seem to be smart enough to figure that out. You can see this in areas like Hanauma Bay where there are no fishermen with spears and there are a lot of visitors. So we look at a variety of different things besides just looking at how scared they are of visitors or how close they come. We're also looking at how it affects their feeding. And besides, in other areas where you have fishermen, you also have predators. And where you have a lot of predators, you have the other fish that will spook more easily as well from anything swimming by. So we're also counting monk seals, turtles, a variety of other things. And we look at fish biomass and fish endemism and abundance and a variety of different fish factors so that we can see if any of these things are changing over time. We're even taking still videos and analyzing those still videos so we can see any species changes or any type of behavioral changes as well. I hope that answered your question.
It kind of does, but a lot of people say, you know, people really mess it up. I go to the Pupuke Marine Life Conservation District a lot. Thousands of people do. And the fish, you know, in really shallow water, the fish really, in a lot of areas, just don't seem to care, which is part of why it's such a fun attraction, just like a Hanauma Bay. And so I'm always curious what it is that really makes the spooky ones spook out.
Certain species are more afraid, and it's the ones that are preyed upon, usually. Even at Hanauma Bay, you'll have some species that will come right up to you, even when the visitors were there, when there's a lot of people in the water. But we find that most of the species are actually coming even closer to us than they were prior to having the bay opened.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
Thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Oh, Kulule, you have a question in the chat box from some students. They want to know how, or maybe this is for Morgan actually, how old you have to be to volunteer and what volunteer opportunities they can do, if any. I think they're 8 and 11 years old.
Okay, so usually if we have volunteers come in individually, they have to be at least 16 years old to volunteer like more independently. But we do have a few volunteers who are younger than that, and they do come with their parents. So they're about 6 and 8 years old as well. So we do make exceptions if younger volunteers want to come in along with a chaperone or parent. Good question. Their mom is willing to come. Yeah, come on down. Setting it onto the volunteer opportunities part. So the volunteers at Hanauma Bay are the folks who are kind of like the front line. So they're the ones who are interacting with the visitors. They're helping to, you know, get them acquainted with the bay. We educate them in the visitor center, in the theater where we play the orientation film, and then also down at the beach we have a kiosk where people can come up and ask questions, whether it's about the bay itself or about the marine life that they're seeing in the water. So really a key part of what the volunteers do is interacting with the public and educating them about the bay and about marine conservation, how they can protect the bay so that it's here for years to come for folks to come and enjoy. Sure, actually I'll put in the chat our email and the link to our website, and that's where you can get a volunteer application online, and you can contact us as well for more information.
I have a question for Sarah, or Anku'ule, I guess. I've seen a lot of reports in the newspaper, and UH News has published findings about the water clarity, and that you guys are finding it's clearer since the closing compared to even the off days, because Hanama is normally closed 1 day a week. Can you just tell us some of the findings of your work since the bay's been closed?
Yeah, we have been seeing clearer water, and like we explained in the video, the way that we're quantifying that is by using that Secchi disk method. And what we found when we did these studies previously in 2018 is that the water was 30% clearer when you compared open days to closed Tuesdays. And we're actually able to share some information with you guys about how much clearer it is now during the closure. So I have a little graph for us to look at. Here we go. And here it is. So we have our different areas of Hanauma Bay down here, back doors, keyhole, channel, and Witch's Brew. Meanwhile, this is all in the inner reef flat, so just before the waves break. And then we have visual water clarity distance here on the y-axis. Days open to the public are in that dark black. So this information is from 2018. Days closed to the public, so Tuesdays in gray, that's also from 2018. And then our lighter bars are COVID closure, Secchi disk methods. And what we're seeing is that it is significantly clearer during the COVID closure versus our closed Tuesdays and our open to the public days. And it's around 42% clearer on our COVID closure days when compared to open to the public days. So that's very exciting.
Is that something that you can visually notice the difference of, Sarah?
I think so. I'd like to think so. We go in and we're walking down or we're driving down and we see the bay and we're like, wow, it looks like a really good visibility day. And then we get out there and we're all like, oh, I wish I had that extra camera with me to take more pictures. So I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that we can see it.
Can you explain the Witch's Brew, which is a place most people don't go to? It's a place where there's a lot of circulation of water, and it has the least amount of visibility. Maybe it's because the current is stirring things up out there, but it would surprise me if those results have an awful lot to do with people impact. Can you interpret those bars there?
Of course. So where he's looking is right here on the graph. And what we're seeing here is that even though we really only get less than 5% of snorkelers and waders here in Witch's Brew, we do see a pretty low visibility as compared to other sectors. And what we have to realize is this is the inner reef flat, so it doesn't get as much water circulation as the outer Witch's Brew area that you might be thinking of. On the inner reef flat, it actually just kind of circulates in Witch's Brew and stays in one place, and it also has a lot more wave action coming in, which could kick up sediment again and suspend it in the water column. So although we don't see as many snorkelers, that may not be where that sediment in the water column causing it to be more turbid is coming from. It could be from these environmental factors, which is also very influential to our visual water clarity distance. So wave action, tidal coefficient, so how high is the high versus how low is the low. If that value is much different, then you're going to see more water stirred up.
I have to go. Sorry.
So one thing I'd like to add is that you're seeing more of this sediment in closed days during the open period, so on the Tuesdays. And you're still seeing higher water quality now during the COVID period. So this means that the fine sediments continue to be resuspended over at least a 24-hour period. So if it's only closed 1 day a week, that sediment continues to resuspend throughout that week. So you're not seeing it drop down to any baseline levels without people.
Lule, you also have a question from George about the Secchi disc and if you're doing any other more quantitative measures of water quality.
Well, we also do sediment trap data. So we have sediment traps out there and we see how much sediment actually lands on the corals. There's also water quality taken by a variety of people. We're having people at the Nature Conservancy and also the Department of Health come and take water quality data as well. So for the sediment, that's pretty much the two methods that we use.
Can you describe a sediment trap, Lule?
It's just a PVC pipe that has a baffle in it so that if waves come, it can't resuspend. It's like a little waffle, like a lighting piece, and it will keep the sediment there. So we can leave it there for a month or more at a time and see over a time period how much sediment settles in that area. And each of the areas are very different than one another. Like Sarah was mentioning, which is Brew, can often have more sediment than others.
So are you seeing a change in your sedimentation rates then between, say, normal week and Tuesday when it's closed and then during the shutdown?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
If you're measuring sediment, are you seeing a similar change in sedimentation rates as you're seeing in the Secchi disc quality visibility?
Sarah, you want to take that?
So we haven't yet been able to process our sediment traps during this time, but we will get you that information as soon as we do, and we discuss that with city and county. We did have some sediment traps out over the hurricane, so that'll be quite interesting to look at. But really, we usually place out these traps for anywhere from a week to a whole 29 days, which is what we did in 2018. So it's an average sedimentation over that time period. We don't really see how much it compares from an open day to a closed day to the public. But we will be able to look at our open time period and compare that to this COVID closure time period once we have those sediment traps processed. I also have a picture of one of the sediment traps in the Reef here, just in case anyone is wondering what they look like. They are just these little PVC traps. So you stick them out there and they hang out at the same level as the substrate so that they can simulate how much sediment is actually falling into that area of reef. So very, very simple.
I also want to add that we are taking temperature at the same time. We have loggers that continuously, every 15 minutes to half hour, record temperature so that we can tell over the entire year how much the temperature is and how much it's changing. And we can relate that to the bleaching surveys that we do each year to see how well corals are doing. Because in 2014-15, when the state of Hawaii had such a huge bleaching event and 35% of coral was lost average in the state, Hanauma Bay actually lost only about 9% of their coral there. So it was much lower than other places on Oahu and lower than other places. The Big Island was hit the hardest, but for many other places other than Lanai.
We had a question earlier for the Hanauma Bay education folks about the bay reopening and what that's looking like.
So we haven't had any announcement on a reopening date for Hanauma Bay. So we are continuing with education kind of in the format that we have right now, like the Voice of the Sea and the webinars and reaching out online to classes to participate with us, as well as, you know, keeping our volunteers updated and trained online. So as it stands right now, there isn't a reopening date for the Bay. And so I see a question about the numbers of people coming to Hanauma Bay. So right now, under the current COVID restrictions, whenever it would reopen, it would follow whatever you know, laws and restrictions that are in place at that particular time. And then the City and County of Honolulu is the management agency for you know, the numbers of people coming to the Bay. So they would be in charge of the numbers coming.
One of the things that we talked about in our making of the episode was the fish behavior, and both Ku'ule and Sarah talked about how they would track that, and we had a question about how do you follow fish. And my question is, did you guys notice any changes in your COVID studies, or is that something you're still working up the data on?
The analysis for the flight initiation distance, that's what we're calling it as we're approaching the fish and we're calculating how much space is between us and the fish before it flees. The analysis is actually quite time intensive, so it might be a little bit before that gets to the public. And also one of the things is that a lot of our COVID closure surveys, they will be piggybacked with when it opens. Yeah, so we're not going to be able to see if there's a change until we do these same types of studies after it opens back to the public. And one of the things that Annie brought up, which I think is really interesting, is that when the Bay does open, it will have to follow COVID procedures. So how many people are coming in might be reduced. And what will be interesting is if we can observe these fish behaviors during that slow reopening phase where they're only allowing limited amounts of people in, and then they're kind of ramping it up over time. So that'll be really interesting for analysis of our videos as well. A good opportunity for us.
A couple other things we're looking at is coral recruitment to see if it's different during the closure than when it reopens, and also looking at coral growth to see if corals are growing faster or not as fast when the Bay is completely closed as to when visitors return. So there's a variety of different things that we're trying to narrow down and see if we can find these differences and be able to associate these things with the population. We were able to do that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
When they reopen, you know that it's going to be spaced out and slower, or is that an assumption? Because what's happening over here on the North Shore is, well, let's just say there aren't any parking places, tents are up, it's just choke with people. A lot of people aren't working, maybe that's why, but don't think that because there's COVID restrictions per se in a generic context that's going to reduce the attendance. We're seeing just the opposite over here.
I see exactly where you're coming from. The one unique thing about Hanauma Bay is that it is regulated from the top. So X amount of people can only go through that theater per 15 minutes because they all have to watch that video. And if we're restricted to only having, you know, let's say max 20 people in that room at a time versus, Annie, do you know how many people are usually allowed in the theater at one time?
So the capacity of regular time is 125.
Yeah, so that could reduce it for us, just having to go through the video. But we do not know what the procedure will be when they do open.
When you do your water quality tests, the state has a testing program, and are there other agencies that will come out and test water also? I mean, your SECI desk is great for suspended solids, but I'm just curious what else you have the capacity out there to be checking on.
Well, we are working with the Nature Conservancy, and they're taking water quality data throughout the state. And so they have come during the closure, during this COVID period, and they will be coming again to compare the water quality at that time.
So your next thing on the 13th is about wastewater in Hanauma Bay. Is that based on studies that are already been done, or is that something pending for the future?
I'm sorry for any confusion. Our next episode, next Thursday, our Hanama talk is about cesspools and wastewater, but it's about throughout the state of Hawaii, not just in Hanauma Bay. So the talks are the Thursday Hanama talks, and Gavin and the Hanauma Bay Education Program have partnered with me, Kanisa, I also work for Hawaii Sea Grant, and so they're themed in that sense, that they're part of our Voice of the Sea series in episodes we've done this year. But next week will be about cesspools and wastewater across Hawaii.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to send out my last poll. And again, thank you for bearing with us as we trial this way of interacting. Our last poll is just a series of 4 Likert scales. So it's before the ZOOMinar, how interested were you? After the ZOOMinar, how interested were you? And again, it's optional, but we'd appreciate your feedback. And then I have my own personal interest question that I'd like to get Gavin to answer for us, and that is tips on underwater photography. We want to capture those fish and invertebrates that we see. Give us some pointers, please.
Just gotta have patience, and you gotta get lucky. Sometimes just being in the right place at the right time. I mean, morning is usually good. You know, shallow water, you don't have to deal with your pictures turning blue and green unless you have filters for your camera. So that's usually the best areas to take it. But it's all about patience, I guess, and luck. So that's my tips. Does that answer your question?
I also know that you go very frequently, so maybe it's also a matter of persistence.
Yeah, persistence. Yeah, I mean, I'm usually in the water pretty much throughout the whole week, so I try to get in different water activities, and you know, just shooting is just one of my hobbies that I like to do. So it's great because it kind of turns snorkeling into a double hobby, so with the photography.
We do have one more question in the chat, and it's about sort of the environmental and moral ethics of reopening the bay in the near future compared to the benefits of letting the bay rest. And I think that's a topic people are discussing for Hanauma Bay as well as other areas across the world, really.
Well, okay, I think personally, it would be nice to have more locals using the bay during this time when we don't have as many visitors to the state. But as a researcher, it's also the great opportunity that we have to be able to see what's happening during this closure. Unfortunately, it's not up to me. So this is something that the state of the city and county of Hawaii and the management agencies will have to deal with.
think we probably have time for one more question or comment if there's anything that our panelists would like to share.
I did see one of the questions that had to do with coral bleaching during this time, and it talked about possibly not having bleaching this year, but we are already seeing paling in other parts of the state, other reefs on Oahu. So we do want to let you know that if you can go out there and survey your reef, we've developed a tool as the Coral Reef Ecology Lab to monitor health, and it's called the Hawaiian Koa card. And I can put in a link to that in the chat. But this card actually lets you go out and survey the reef, and it tells you what the health of the coral is. It's a proxy using color. And what we did is we brought corals into the lab and simulated a bleaching event, and we took their health parameters and their colors and was able to kind of transpose that, and we've developed this card. So if anyone is interested in getting out to their favorite reef and taking a pre-bleaching survey this month, that would be amazing. And then you can upload your data to the web, and we're actually able to track where there is coral bleaching and where there isn't. And why that's important is because if there are populations that are more resilient during these high temperature times, we want to understand why maybe they are that way. So yes, there may still be a bleaching event, unfortunately, this summer. Hopefully not as bad as in 2014 and 15, but still keep your eyes peeled.
And for those of you who don't have a Hawaiian Koa or Coral Health Assessment card, you can get them on any of the islands at the Division of Aquatic Resources offices.
And can you explain what you mean by paling?
When corals are introduced to any type of stress, temperature, sediment, anything else, they start to lose their symbiotic algae, and this gives them their color. It also gives them their food and their energy source. So once they start to lose this, the color starts to fade, except in those species that have their own fluorescent pigments. So sometimes you'll see some bright blues or some bright pinks during bleaching events. And that's because the little algae have left, but you still have the fluorescent pigments. Otherwise, all you see is the transparent tissue and underneath the white skeleton. So as those algae are leaving, the color is leaving until it completely is white. And if temperatures continue, then the coral will eventually die.
Speaking of coral death, as it relates to Pocillopora meandrina, that has some senescence, what is the average lifespan of, it kind of grows fast, gets pretty big, and then there's a whole bunch of dead ones around, and you don't know whether they've been there for, 2 or 3 years or 10 or 15 years. I mean, there's all these clumps.
Right, that's a really good question, because it's one of the only genera of corals that have a specific size that we'll get to. The other corals can continue to grow for hundreds and hundreds of years. But like you said, Pocillopora meandrina, which is one of the first species to come in and recruit, is often one of the first species to die in high temperature events. It's most susceptible. It has a very low tolerance for temperature. So you see that a lot, but it will recruit. It will get only a certain size. We do not know exactly what size because it depends on the water conditions in different areas. But you won't see very large colonies like you do in the lobe corals and in the finger corals and some of those other corals.
Thank you.
It looks like we've reached our 3 o'clock mark, and so I want to honor everyone's time today and just say mahalo. I really appreciate everybody coming out and videoing in and awesome questions and awesome information. So round of applause.
Hey, mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in. This will actually be recorded, so it'll be available on our Hanauma Talks if you missed any of it. So stay safe and hope to see you guys all next week for August 13th for the cesspools episode. Okay, aloha.
Aloha.